It started like any other day. I was sipping my morning coffee, watching the sunrise over my quiet suburban street, when I noticed a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was a flyer or maybe a lost pet notice. But as I got closer, I saw the bold letters HOA violation notice. My heart sank. I'd heard stories from neighbors about the HOA being strict, but I'd always kept my yard tidy, paid my dues on time, and followed the rules. What could I have possibly have done wrong? I opened the envelope and read the letter. According to the HOA, my mailbox was the wrong color. Not just a little off, completely unacceptable, they said. I was given 10 days to repaint it or face a $50 fine. I laughed at first. It seemed so petty, so trivial. But I figured, fine, I'll paint the mailbox. I went to the hardware store, bought the approved color, and spent my Saturday morning painting. I even took a photo and emailed it to the HOA as proof. A week later, another letter arrived. This time, it was about my grass. Apparently, it was too long by half an inch. I measured it myself, 2.7 inches, just barely over the 2.5-inch limit in the HOA handbook. I mowed the lawn, took another photo, and sent it in. I started to feel like I was being watched, like someone was waiting for me to slip up. Then came the trash can notice. I'd left my bin out for an extra hour after pickup. Another $50 fine. I was starting to see a pattern. Every week, a new letter, a new violation, a new fine. I tried to talk to my neighbors, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. Several of them had been getting similar notices, some for improper holiday decorations, others for unapproved garden ornaments, and one for having a basketball hoop in the driveway. We started comparing notes and realized that the HOA president lived just a few houses down. She was known for walking the neighborhood every morning, notebook in hand, jotting down every little thing she thought was out of place. It felt less like community management and more like surveillance. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. I wanted to ask questions, get some answers, and maybe even push back a little. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and as soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension. The board sat at a long table at the front, stacks of paperwork in front of them. Residents filled the chairs, some looking nervous, others angry. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly explained my situation. I showed photos of my mailbox, my lawn, my trash can. I asked why I was being fined for such minor issues and why the rules seemed to be enforced so strictly all of a sudden. The president responded with a tight smile. We're just trying to maintain the standards of the community. If we let one thing slide, it all goes downhill. I left the meeting feeling frustrated but determined. I started keeping detailed records. Every letter, every fine, every photo. I even installed a security camera to document my yard and prove I was following the rules. But the letters kept coming, the fines kept adding up, and then things got worse. One day I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. According to the letter, I now owed over $1,000 in unpaid fines and late fees. If I didn't pay within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my home. I was stunned. I'd paid every fine as soon as I received it, but the letter claimed I'd missed deadlines, failed to correct violations, and ignored warnings. I called the HOA office, but no one would take my call. I emailed, but got no response. I started to feel trapped. My home, the place I'd worked so hard for, the place where I was raising my kids, was suddenly at risk. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't focus at work. Every time I saw a yellow envelope, my stomach dropped. I felt like I was living in a nightmare and there was no way out. I talked to a lawyer who explained that HOAs have a lot of power. If I didn't pay, they could put a lien on my house, making it impossible to sell or refinance, and in some states, they could even foreclose on my home to collect unpaid fines. The lawyer advised me to pay the amount demanded, but also to start documenting everything and to request a full accounting of my fines and payments. I paid the $1,000, but I wasn't ready to give up. I started digging into the HOA's records, requesting meeting minutes, financial statements, and copies of all correspondence related to my property. What I found shocked me. Some of the fines had been issued for violations that didn't exist. Others were for things that weren't even against the rules. And in several cases, the board had failed to follow their own procedures. issuing fines without proper notice, or failing to give me a chance to appeal. I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my neighbors too. We started meeting regularly, sharing our stories, and supporting each other. We decided to organize, to push back against the board, and to demand transparency and fairness.
We begin by gathering evidence. Every neighbor who had received a violation notice brought their letters, photos, and any emails or texts from the HOA. We created a spreadsheet to track the dates, the supposed infractions, the amounts of the fines, and whether or not the board had followed the proper process. The more we compared notes, the more patterns we saw. Some people were being fined for things that others got away with. Some violations were for rules that didn't even exist in the official handbook. And in a few cases, the board had issued fines without ever sending a warning or giving the homeowner a chance to fix the problem. It was clear. The HOA wasn't just strict, they were inconsistent and sometimes downright unfair. We decided to take our concerns public. At the next HOA meeting, we showed up in force. There were more than 20 of us, each with a folder of documentation. When the board opened the floor for comments, we took turns sharing our stories. One neighbor described being fined for a non-compliant mailbox, even though it matched the board president's own mailbox. Another talked about being cited for excessive lawn ornaments when the board treasurer had a yard full of statues and bird baths. The room was tense, but as more people spoke, you could feel the mood shift. We weren't just isolated complainers anymore. We were a group, united by a common cause. The board tried to defend their actions, insisting that they were just enforcing the rules. But when we asked for specifics, where in the handbook certain rules were written, or why some people were fined and others weren't, they struggled to answer. The president grew defensive, accusing us of undermining community standards. But the more she talked, the more it became clear that the board was used to operating without much oversight. After the meeting, several neighbors who had never spoken up before approached us. They shared their own stories. Fines for improperly stored bikes, warnings about unapproved holiday decorations, and even threats of legal action over a child's sidewalk chalk art. It was clear that the problem was bigger than any one person. The HOA had created a culture of fear, where people felt like they were always one step away from a violation. We decided to take things further. We started a neighborhood chat group and a private Facebook group where people could share their experiences and ask questions. We encouraged everyone to attend meetings, read the bylaws, and keep records of every interaction with the board. We also began researching state laws about HOAs, learning about our rights as homeowners and the limits of the board's authority. One of our neighbors, a retired accountant, volunteered to review the HOA's financial statements. What she found was alarming. There were large payments to contractors with no explanation, expenses for community improvements that no one could remember, and a reserve fund that was much smaller than it should have been. We realized that the board wasn't just overzealous with fines, they might be mismanaging the community's money. Armed with this information, we requested a special meeting with the board. We presented our findings, asked for a full audit of the HOA's finances, and demanded that the board follow the rules they were supposed to enforce. The board was clearly rattled. They agreed to the audit, but only after several heated exchanges and a lot of pressure from the group. While we waited for the audit, the board's attitude began to change. The violation notices slowed down and the tone of their letters became less aggressive. At the next regular meeting, the president announced that the board would be reviewing all current policies and procedures to ensure fairness and transparency. It was a small victory, but it felt like progress. But the real turning point came when the results of the audit were released. The accountant we'd hired found several discrepancies, payments that couldn't be explained, missing receipts, and a pattern of expenses that suggested favoritism towards certain board members' friends and family. We brought the findings to the next meeting, and this time the whole neighborhood showed up. People were angry, but they were also energized. For the first time, it felt like we had the power to make real change. The board president tried to downplay the findings, but the rest of the board was clearly shaken. After a tense discussion, 2 board members resigned on the spot. The remaining members agreed to hold new elections and to bring in an outside management company to oversee the HOA's finances. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Through it all, I learned that fighting back against an unfair HOA isn't easy. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to stand up for yourself and your neighbors, but it's worth it. My home is more than just a house. It's a place where I want to feel safe, respected, and part of a real community. And while the battle with the HOA was one of the hardest things I've ever faced, it also brought my neighbors and I closer together.
The weeks after the audit were a whirlwind. The neighborhood buzzed with conversation, at the mailbox, on evening walks, and in the group chat that now included nearly every homeowner on the block. For the first time, people who had never spoken to each other were sharing stories, comparing notes, and realizing just how much they had in common. The sense of isolation and fear that the HOA had created was slowly being replaced by a sense of solidarity and hope. The board, now down 2 members, tried to regain control. They sent out a letter promising greater transparency and a renewed commitment to fairness. They announced that all future violation notices would include photos, specific rule citations, and a clear appeals process. They also promised to hold open meetings at more convenient times and to publish the minutes online for everyone to see. It was a start, but many of us were still skeptical. We decided to keep the pressure on. Several neighbors volunteered to run for the open board positions, and we organized a campaign to get out the vote. We went door to door, explaining what had happened and encouraging people to get involved. For the first time in years, the board election was competitive, with more candidates than open seats. On election night, the community room was packed. People who had never attended a meeting before showed up, eager to have their voices heard. The results were a turning point. 2 of our group's candidates were elected, and a third narrowly missed winning a seat. The new board immediately set to work, reviewing old violation notices, refunding unfair fines, and revising the most controversial rules. They also hired an independent management company to handle the finances, ensuring that every dollar was accounted for and every expense was justified. But the changes weren't just about rules and money. The new board made it a priority to rebuild trust and community spirit. They organized a block party, complete with food trucks, games for kids, and a raffle for free landscaping services. They started a monthly newsletter highlighting positive stories, like the neighbor who helped an elderly resident with yard work, or the family who organized a food drive for a local shelter. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to feel like a community again. For me, the biggest change was personal. I no longer felt like I was living under a microscope, waiting for the next violation notice to arrive. I started to enjoy my home again, planting flowers, hosting barbecues, and chatting with neighbors on the sidewalk. The anxiety that once kept me up at night was replaced by a sense of pride and belonging. But the experience also left me with a new perspective. I realized how easy it is for power to go unchecked, and how important it is for homeowners to stay informed and involved. I learned that the rules are only as fair as the people who enforce them, and that it's up to all of us to hold our leaders accountable. I also learned that change is possible, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. Looking back, I'm grateful for the support of my neighbors. Without them, I never would have had the courage to stand up to the HOA. Together, we proved that a group of determined homeowners can make a difference, even in the face of intimidation and resistance. We turned a nightmare into an opportunity for growth, and in the process, we built a stronger, more connected community. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still disagreements about parking, about noise, about the best way to handle violations. But now, those disagreements were handled with respect and transparency. The board listened to feedback, explained their decisions, and made changes when necessary. People felt heard, and that made all the difference. The story of how my HOA tried to destroy my life and what happened next is a reminder that homeownership isn't just about property values or curb appeal. It's about community, accountability, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. It's about knowing your rights, supporting your neighbors, and never giving up, even when the odds seem impossible. If you're facing a similar situation, don't lose hope. Start by documenting everything, building alliances with your neighbors, and learning your rights. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge unfair rules, and demand transparency. And remember, you're not alone. There are resources, advocacy groups, and legal protections out there to help you fight back. In the end, the battle with my HOA taught me more than I ever expected, not just about rules and regulations,
but about resilience, community, and the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary change. My home is still my sanctuary, but now it's also a symbol of what's possible when you refuse to be bullied and choose to fight for what matters.